you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Trulytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, I have Alan Darby, the CEO of Alaris Acquisitions, with me, and we're going to be talking about, big surprise, acquisitions. But this is going to be a completely different conversation than any of the others you've likely heard on the topic. We're going to be spending our time talking about what it is like to be a buyer in the search of another business to acquire and the work that goes along with that. And we'll also cover a bunch of other topics. We'll kind of get in the headspace a little bit of the seller, what the seller is looking for, and talk about some trends as well. But this is a fascinating conversation, one that I think is incredibly important now, because as you'll hear Alan and I talk, when he sold his business back in 2009, the world looked completely different for M&A activity for financial advisors and RIAs than it does now. Things are moving really quickly. And so you need to be up to date on what is expected of you as a buyer if you're hoping to enter the marketplace and successfully acquire other businesses. So I think you're going to love this conversation. Before we get started, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on, and leave a comment where available. We love to hear from you. And if you have a question or suggestion for a guest or a topic for the show, please send those in, podcast@trulytics.com, or you can just hit me up anywhere on the internet. I'm at Mike Langford, basically everywhere. Would love to hear from you. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Alan Darby. Well, Alan Darby, coming to us from the Dominican Republic, making everybody jealous on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, nice to be here. I'm sorry to make you jealous, but it's 85 and sunny, no humidity. Life is good.
Life is very good for Alan and the Darby family right now. You and I were talking about this when we had our prep call about how my wife and I used to go to the Dominican Republic sometimes twice a year when we lived in New England before kids. And now that our kids are getting at that age bracket, we're like, you know what? I think it's time to go back. It's just such a wonderful place. The people are really friendly. We've always enjoyed our time there. So I hope you and your family are doing the same.
Oh, we're digging it. It is a great place. The food is wonderful. The infrastructure here is really good. So life is it's better than the 30-degree cold, gray, dreary North Carolina winter that we're used to. So we'll stay here for a while, I think.
Perfect. Well, I thought we could start things off really talking about what makes Alaris Acquisitions unique, right? Because you have a unique model for helping independent financial advisors and RIAs grow through acquisition. And we talk a lot about that on the show, about acquiring other businesses. And as I've kind of navigated this space over the years, one of the things that's become abundantly clear to me is there is no shortage. In fact, there is an abundance of M&A consultants and business brokers that focus on the wealth management industry. But your model is really different than others. And I thought that would be a fun way to kick the show off. And maybe you kind of tell us a little bit about Alaris and how you're different, how you're unique.
Yeah, well, we like to think we're unique. We're a buyer advisor. So that out of the gate in terms of how we've structured our business is different than what we see in the M&A space, specifically in the wealth management industry today. Not that a buyer advisor is a unique model, that there's plenty of buyer advisors in other industries, but don't see it very commonly in the wealth management space. So simply, we are hired by clients, and our clients call them larger wealth management practices who want to grow their business by acquisition. And while they perhaps have done some acquisitions in the past, it hasn't been like a consistent part of their growth strategy, but they want it to be. And so they don't have the internal M&A team. And so they hire us to essentially represent them in the marketplace. And so if you can think about if you were going to look to partner with another firm via an acquisition, historically, you could go try to negotiate one-on-one with the buyer. which is fine. It's just a bit complex and overwhelming if you don't know how these things work. And you might have to kiss a lot of frogs to find the right one. And then, or you could go hire a seller advisor, which we know a number of fantastic investment banking firms out there that you can go hire to represent you. And they'll do all the kind of the prep work and helping you understand the M&A landscape. They'll do a valuation on your practice. They'll create a confidential information memorandum, and they'll send it out to a number of buyers that will start bidding on your practice. And so it's a better process because you have an expert in your corner. It's just very expensive. So you'll pay hundreds of thousands in fees, whether they're retainers, progress fees, or success fees. So we've just inverted that process. So we run a similar, I actually, based on what I've experienced, I think it's a more robust process than most seller advisors we're familiar with. And if you believe that we have a diverse client base that's broadly representative of the market, meaning all different types of structures, cultures, value proposition, et cetera, and we do. So today we have roughly 20 clients, and we're adding, seems like a few a month. And we're not biased in terms of who you transact with. Then we'll get you to the same place as a seller advisor would, but without the fee, because our clients pay the fee. So we think it's a better economic outcome if those first two premises are true, and they are true. So it is relatively new in the market, and we're seeing it, get a lot of traction. So we're pleased thus far. I would say one thing from a buyer's perspective, we run the entire process. So if you're not familiar with how an M&A transaction works and the cadence you need to run and so forth, we're a great resource for you. We push the entire process. We don't just source an acquisition opportunity for you and hand it off to your internal team. We run the entire process from the very first time we get someone on the phone to the time they're signing their definitive agreements. And so that is a different model, I think, as well, from a buyer's perspective.
I love that because, and I'm not sure if this is exactly what your client base looks like, but in most cases, I would imagine the buyer is doing this for the first time, right? Most of the buyers are out there that they have never done this before. They're not seasoned M&A shops. And at a certain point, there are certain firms that absolutely do multiple acquisitions and they get really good at it. Yeah. But if I were doing it for the first time, I'd want to make sure that I had somebody who's walked that path before, that I want to talk to them about this. Like, what are some of the landmines I want to avoid? We hear often that there's a lot more sellers than buyers out there, that, some of the ratios you hear thrown around is 50 buyers for every one seller. Mm-hmm. Those ratios change quite a bit when you start figuring out, is it a qualified buyer? Right. Yeah. And the like, but basically what we know is that most advisors and most RIAs would be very interested in acquiring another practice, right? And adding more business through acquisition. But it's not an easy process. It's not something you should enter into lightly, and having your expertise on hand would be very, very helpful. Are there any big, like, this is something somebody should be aware of before they go down the road, right? So before somebody calls you, as a buyer, if they're thinking about it, as they approach you, is there something they should be thinking about out of the gate?
Yeah, gosh, there's a number of things. We actually do a session, we call it Getting Deal Ready, with our clients to walk them through all of the things that they should be considering in terms of launching let's just call it a robust M&A process. Because I would say most firms that we talk to as a client, they've done an acquisition or two. Some have done multiple acquisitions, but it's been not like a consistent growth plan, part of their growth plan. It's just been a relational transaction. Maybe the CEO or someone on the team knew another smaller firm, and because of the relationship, they were able to acquire them. And so the thing that I would say you really need to pay attention to is, what is your differentiating value proposition? Because you're right. I mean, essentially everyone's a buyer. It's amazing. There are so many people who are raising their hand saying we want to acquire, but I find a lot of them don't really put a lot of thought into what makes them stand out in the sea of other buyers. They think that we're a great firm, we're great people, we love our clients, we're trustworthy, and that's a reason why someone should join us. And that's everyone says that, right? So it's that's not a differentiating value proposition. So what are you bringing to the table for a let's call them a seller to stand out? And consider that there are certain things that are table stakes today, where historically they may have been a differentiating value proposition. I would say centralization of back office functions, for example. Everyone does that. So, that's not a compelling story to say to someone, well, we're going to help get you out of compliance and accounting and technology and, billing and payroll, all that stuff. That's everyone does that. So that better be a part of your value proposition, but it's not a differentiator.
Yeah.
So we think that there's not enough emphasis on that. So I typically ask them, all right, so a client, what are you doing for a firm, for example, on practice management? Are you helping them define roles and responsibilities for their staffing locally? Are you helping get rainmakers out of non-rainmaking functions? Are you helping turn their generalists into more niche specialists so they can get capacity? How are you helping them go from 300,000 in revenue per employee to 4, 5, 600,000 and beyond? That's a practice management competence. That's a very strong value proposition, because a lot of business owners are not good at managing their processes and team and so forth. They're great advisors and they're charismatic entrepreneurs, but that doesn't mean that they're good at managing process or managing people. And so that's a very big differentiator if you have a practice management competence. What type of central resources are you bringing to the table? Do you have, for example, true expertise that is an added value to a potential partner? For example, if you have a competence in qualified plans that I don't, but I have clients that need that service. Now, as a part of your team, I have that expertise. Or are you really good at advanced estate planning or tax planning? These other things that I'm not. So central resources, expertise, people, that's a big value add. New services that I don't have is a big value add. And then lastly would be organic growth. How are you going to help me grow? Right? So there's organic growth is like the holy grail. If you have a compelling organic growth story, that's a big reason to become a part of your firm. So that would having a well-articulated and differentiated value proposition beyond centralization of operations, and we're great people. That's where I try to help clients get really clear about.
That's great. Yeah, everybody can say, "Hey, we love our clients, and we're really good, and we're a fun place to work."
We're trustworthy. It's wonderful. I hope you are.
One of the things that popped into my mind as you were talking about that, and kind of like demonstrating your firm's strengths, is you're using Truelytics with this process. And one of the things that I've always loved about the solution is, you get these 50 KPIs, right? It's not just a valuation or whatever. You get this report card on the seller's business and on the buyer's business. And it makes exactly what you're talking about there, somewhat quantitative, right? You're able to kind of line things up like, hey, look, here's a strength of ours compared to other firms in the industry. Here's an area where we're weak and you're strong. If we brought you on, it would bolster our strengths in this firm. It's a really interesting approach. And I love that, the way that you articulated it, but I was kind of thinking through like how you might use the actual tool set.
Well, it's okay, for example, if you're a buyer, not to have all of those answers, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have that infrastructure, for example, in the practice management component, that's fine, because there are a number of sellers who are interested in being a part of the build. When we talk to prospective sellers about how to think about vetting a partner, one of the questions we ask of them is, where do you want to join a firm on the life journey from being a smaller startup where things aren't, and I would say small is around $1 billion. So they don't have all of the processes figured out, all the people in place. all the infrastructure that they will have in 5 years,
Mm.
when they're 5 billion. But as a part of joining that team, you get to participate in the build, right? So you get to be highly contributive to that value proposition, whether it's your expertise or what you're bringing to the table. So there are plenty of sellers. We have clients that fit that description of a smaller RIA that hasn't figured it all out, and we're just very upfront with a seller to find out, do you want to be a part of that type of an enterprise, or would you prefer to be a part of a larger firm, $5-10 billion plus, who has all that stuff figured out? It's pretty much plug and play, and you don't have to think about any of that. So it's not necessarily a problem if you don't have a compelling value proposition in all those areas, if you're willing to lock arms with another smaller firm and let them participate in the collaborative build of your enterprise.
Yeah, you just brought up at a really important point without expressing it overtly. Most of the advisors who sell, especially the ones that you're working with, are not exiting the business, and I think that's a really important point to make here, because one of the things that I've noticed over the years is a lot of our discussion when we think about M&A and we think about succession planning and so forth is around the advisor kind of getting toward the tail end of his or her career and looking to exit the business, either to retire or to kind of glide path out or whatever. But what you're seeing is, and you're just covering there, is that a lot of advisors are actually looking to join another firm. They want to grow. They want to continue doing what they do. They first of all, this is a great lifestyle business. It can be, but it's also a rewarding business as well. What are some of the kind of the motivating factors you see for sellers who are looking to go that route of selling their practice and joining another firm?
Yeah, there's everyone's different, obviously, in terms of what they're looking for, but I find that the themes that motivate partnerships tend to group into three general categories. And how you weight these, of course, is typically how old you are. So like older advisors may weight. Well, let me give you the category. So the first category, we call them the monetary drivers for a partnership, and that's typically like taking chips off the table. So you have a firm that has built an asset and they want to liquefy some of the value that they've created in their entity. So obviously through transacting, they can take some cash out, de-risk their asset, and so forth. Then the other side of that is, let's call it an expanded economic opportunity, whether that's in an equity exchange, exchanging whatever their form of equity ownership is into the buyer's equity in the belief that it's going to grow faster, right? And so there's this multiple expansion that occurs as firms hit certain thresholds of EBITDA, and so they believe that by joining this other organization, we're likely to hit those thresholds more rapidly or with more assurance, and therefore it makes sense for me to own their stock versus mine. There's also minority transactions that are structured where I'm not monetizing all of my free cash flow today. I'm retaining a piece of it, or a large piece of it, in the belief that as a part of this larger organization, when I go to monetize the remaining cash flow that I retained, it'll be at a higher multiple. So that's kind of like an equity play as well. So monetary drivers are definitely a part of it, but I don't find it's the primary motivator. It's one of those things where it's got to be a market valuation on your business. And of course you want expanded economic upside, but the bigger drivers would be the quality of life. And that's kind of what I touched on earlier. It's getting out of all the stuff that I dislike about the business that tends to be operations, compliance, technology management, billing, payroll, accounting, all of that stuff that you or someone on your team is spending time in, which is not moving the needle forward for growth. And it certainly doesn't give these people personal fulfillment like working with clients does. And so they want to get out of all that stuff so that they can focus on existing clients, new client acquisition, or mentoring others who do both. Then there is the practice management component. They just want to reshape how they work. They don't want to get out of the business, but they don't like how things are working today. So having a practice management competence through a new partnership to help manage the team, help train the team, give them guidance, further career path, that all of that stuff is very important to a lot of business owners who just don't like that aspect of. They didn't get into the business to manage a team of 5, 10, 20 people.
Yeah.
And then access to resources that they don't have. So that's it's in this form of staff or expertise. All of those go into the quality of life bucket of reasons. And I find that's usually like the most important thing in a partnership that they're looking for is help. And the you that I'm talking about is the owners, the team members, and the clients. So they want to see an improvement in their business and their work life. And then lastly would be growth. They believe partnering with another firm is going to accelerate their growth, whether that's through organic means that the new partner is bringing to the table or inorganic. So that's one thing that I find I'm constantly trying to demyth is that because a lot of firms, they're trying to decide, well, should I transact with this larger firm or should I be a buyer? Back and add to the pool of endless buyers, should we go that route? And I tell them, like, look, joining another firm, transacting with another firm does not remove the ability for you to go acquire. In fact, it should accelerate it because most of our clients would love to have a hub, for example, in your market, wherever that market is, and then go do tuck-in acquisitions around it. So that's just transacting with someone else does not remove your ability to go acquire. It should accelerate it, in fact.
I love it.
So those are the reasons firms transact: monetary, quality of life, and growth. Succession is in there as well. Succession is like a very popular topic. It's not usually the main driver either, but so, and then you weight those based on your individual circumstances. And so in a multi-partner practice, it's not uncommon that you have partners who are weighting those buckets of reasons differently. The older partner may be looking to liquefy more of his asset, where the younger partner doesn't really need a liquidity event. They want to grow, so you have, even within a firm, partners who have different motivators, but that would be the group of reasons that I say drive transactions.
Really, really smart. I love it. And the thing that I love as I was listening to that motivation is it's not separate from wanting to serve the clients better, right? When as a business grows, and especially if you're that small team, you get pulled thin in certain areas. You're not, as you mentioned, you're not necessarily good at everything. You may be good at client acquisition. You may be good at client service. You may be good at the financial planning and the modeling of things. It doesn't mean you're great at everything. And as you start to add more clients at a certain point in time, there becomes a bit of a capacity issue to do everything, to make sure the clients are being served as best as possible. And so oftentimes by joining another firm, you can add much higher quality services for those clients. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it all ultimately has to result in an improvement to somebody, like always the client. I've yet to meet the firm who says they place their clients first, but everyone says that, but and a lot of them really mean it. Every decision you make, I think, as a business owner should ultimately positively impact your clients. If you're going to do a transaction that has a negative consequence to them, that's not a good outcome. Obviously, it could also be a positive outcome for your team. That's another common misconception. Particularly in firms where they have like a handshake succession deal with the junior team, where they haven't really facilitated the equity transfer yet, but they've talked about it, and those juniors are expecting that they're going to step into that role. And the two problems with that for the owner is, one, an internal transaction is not likely to produce as high a valuation as an external one. There's also the reality that at a certain size, the younger people can't write the check, and then there's also the risk that they don't run it as well as you do. I mean, perhaps they could run it better, but the odds are they're not the entrepreneur that you are. They're probably more of an employee mentality. And so handing that over to the younger team might not produce the result that you're looking for just from the success of the business. But that aside, again, transacting with another firm does not remove the opportunity to equitize the younger team, because the buyer is always going to want to make sure that the people responsible for driving the revenue in that office have skin in the game.
Mm.
And so they're quite willing to facilitate getting equity in their hands. Often the transaction is the catalyst to equitize those younger people. So, get it. That's a misconception also, is that you're going to remove opportunity from the younger people. But in all situations, we have to make sure that the transaction benefits the clients for sure.
I love that you just brought that up, because you are not the first person to mention that younger advisors or junior advisors, however you want to define it, or staff advisors that have been at the firm for a while, who don't have a large equity stake. And if you want to facilitate them acquiring a piece of the business, there's usually a couple of things wrong there. Like you mentioned, unfortunately, you're not going to get as high a valuation by selling to an internal team. But very often those folks they haven't built up the wealth where they could actually make the acquisition. And so we talk a lot to the team at Skyview Partners, and this kind of bridges where I want to go next. And they say oftentimes to facilitate that, we need to bring in that outside acquisition partner to join, to do an M&A deal, to make it possible so you can get the financing to acquire that business, and then to kind of recapitalize the business, if you will, to make sure that everybody has their ownership stake, and then grow the business from there. This is a great transition. Let's jump in the time machine and go back to 2009, when you sold your business and made a career shift. And it was a really interesting story that you shared during prep. You happened to make the change really at a massive inflection point for the industry, right? I mean, you think about, if we're thinking 2009, right? The iPhone is 2 years old. Most advisors are still on BlackBerries. Most advisors are not using social media in their business or any other real genuine digital marketing and all that type of stuff. But one of the other things that started to happen there is kind of an acquisition / roll-up trend started to happen there. And you were very much at the forefront of that. So I wonder if you might, take the listeners behind the scenes of, like, after you sold your practice in 2009, what was the next steps, and then how it led you to where you are today?
It's a very interesting story, and one that I would like to say I planned, but it really would just kind of fell into it, more or less. I did sell my business in 2009 and ended up taking about a year and a half off, trying to explore what I was going to do next in my career, and decided to get back into the business. So that was the surprising thing. Number one, after selling, I decided to get back in. So we were going to start growing. I had grown by acquisition before, so I decided I was going to do that again. But I'd been away for a year and a half, so I decided to go out to the Schwab conference. That's where I'd custodied before, and I had met Joe Duran years before, right when he started United Capital. I don't know if he's made his first acquisition. He may have done one, but he talked to us about acquiring our firm. We were buying some accounting firms at the time, so he didn't want to do that. But I love Joe, and when I met him, I think he liked me a lot, but we didn't do a transaction. So fast forward again 5 years, and we're now in 2012. I'm at the Schwab conference in 2011, excuse me, and I'm standing in the vendor hall thinking to myself, I bet Joe Duran is here. I wonder how he's doing. And he just walks right in front of me on his way to some interview. And so I grabbed him and shared what had happened in my business and what I've been thinking about doing. And given the fact that I had owned an RIA and we'd done transactions before, and they needed help at that point on the east half of the country. They're in Newport, or they were in Newport, California. And so he asked me to join their team. So I thought about it and somewhat reluctantly did it, because in doing so, I was giving up my entrepreneur dream to go do my own roll up of sorts. So, but I ended up taking that position as an independent contractor, what's called a buyer advisor. I didn't know the term existed back then, but I was a buyer advisor for United Capital. And so that really launched, as an owner of an RIA, I'd done acquisitions before, but that was what really launched me into being a consultant, more or less, to one company, United Capital. So I built what I would call their sourcing competence. So prior to me, most of their transactions, I think, came through third-party intermediaries like seller advisors. And so we started really an aggressive outbound search for them. I built a team of up to 8 people. And we were we were the firm knocking on everyone's door on behalf of United Capital for about 7.5 years. So we did 33 acquisitions, I think, for them. So it was a great run. Goldman bought us in 2019, and they weren't, I don't think, really interested to do many acquisitions going forward. So the band broke up. Matt Brinker, who ran the team, he went to Merchant Investment Management, and then I went and started Alaris. I just took my team and we rebranded it. So I had no idea if it would work. It was a little bit nerve-wracking to consider going out on my own under a separate brand from United, because that's, no one knew me as an independent firm. They always thought I was an employee of United. But it's been a well-received model thus far, but an interesting way to get here for sure.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, I don't think you're the first entrepreneur for sure to call it spin out of a larger organization. Like, demand for this type of work and service was proven by the larger firm, and now you're doing it. What's really interesting is a lot has changed since those early days of 2009. One of the things that really stands out to me, and I've talked about it here and there over the years, is the change in what a buyer should expect when acquiring a firm. So back in 2009, it was pretty well expected that seller financing would be a part of the deal, right? If you were a small RIA, you were going to buy another RIA, there was going to be some money down, and then the seller would take back a note. There'd be like a 4, maybe 5-year earn out at the max, some sort of revenue share there, and then eventually the selling advisor might walk away or what have you. But with new financing options like by lenders like Skyview Partners, that's completely off the table now, right? Because Skyview will provide 100% financing, right? And Live Oak Bank will provide financing for buyers. And I'm sure there's a new other entrants coming in as well. So that's going to change the landscape a lot. I'm sure it's, driven prices.
Access to capital is, I would just say the industry has matured. The actual M&A landscape has matured in our niche.
Yeah.
And we're seeing deal structures evolve. You're mentioning access to capital that wasn't there before. Of course, the demographics in our industry are such that it's going to be a wave of M&A activity, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And then people are just more mature. They're wiser, I think. There's and of course, the number of buyers have, I don't even know how to put a number on it. When everyone is a buyer, it's so there's so much more interest, I think. And then, as we've kind of talked on some topics, I think sellers are being educated that transacting with another firm does not mean you're no longer an owner. You don't have to give up all of your autonomy. You're not going to be treated like an employee and dictated to and micromanaged. No, I don't have a client that has a model like that.
Right.
So you expect a lot of stuff in an acquisition partner. You're hopeful to get things from them, whether it's the monetary quality of life or growth, all those things. In exchange for that, you're going to give up a degree of autonomy. You make all the decisions today, but as a part of this new team, you won't make all the decisions. You just have to understand what their autonomy trade-off is. Like, what am I getting, and what kind of autonomy do I have to give up in order to get it? And if you look at a spectrum of autonomy, on the one end is, call it a loose conglomerate of entrepreneurs, and on the other end is a highly dogmatic, systematized, almost like a franchise. There's every point on the spectrum in between those two extremes today. Yeah. So whatever you're looking for in terms of an ideal outcome, there's likely someone that can deliver that for you.
Yeah. I like you mentioned that the business is, maturing, if you will, right? Getting smarter. I've really observed that as well. For the longest time, people thought of advisors as they own a job, right? They basically, many of them got their start when they're stockbrokers. I seem to mention that on every single one of these podcasts. But, and then if they went independent or RIA, they basically still operated much the same as like, hey, listen, I have this job that I own. It pays really well. I've got a great lifestyle. But in this past decade, you're starting to see some of its new breed of advisors coming in, younger advisors who are thinking about this much more like a business, right? Like I'm going to build up our client roster. I'm going to have the staff to support it, and I'm going to acquire other practices and grow into a legitimate business. And it's really, really been fascinating to watch. I wonder if you've observed kind of, now here we are in 2021, if you've observed any trends that have grown out of that, and then we can expect in the years to come. Because as you mentioned, you did 33 deals when you were with United Capital alone, and you've done many, many more since you left it and formed Alaris. So what are some of the key trends that you're seeing that buyers and sellers should be aware of?
I think probably the most meaningful trend that I've noticed recently is in the economic structures that are available. If you think of just break the world of transactions into full acquisitions where an acquirer is buying 100% of your practice, and then there's a minority transaction structure where they're not buying 100%, there's something less than 50%, So if those are the two dominant models that have existed, I see those two kind of converging a bit. So the way that I would historically anyway have touted the benefit of a full acquisition model is it's the one that gives you the most integration lift. So so aside from the monetary aspects of a partnership, your business should be fundamentally improved. Your work life should improve. Your resources should improve. Well, that only really occurs if you integrate with a new partner. Okay, integrate would be like the brand changes, centralization of all the back office, new technology stack, again, practice management, additional resources, organic growth. Well, they can only do that for you if they're fully integrated. Okay, so that means there's a lot of change that occurs, but in every point of change in the full acquisition model, there should be a really well defined historic benefit to the change that they're requesting. They're asking you to change this, but here's why. We can show you real data that demonstrates why you want to make that change. So that's the full acquisition benefit. Is it's the one that allows you the most lift from your new partner. The minority transaction, I think, is the superior economic outcome, because you're retaining whenever you monetize, you're monetizing at a multiple based on your business's worth, whatever that range is. And the larger the business goes, the more profitable it becomes, et cetera, that multiple expands. Right. So a smaller business might transact at 5 or 6x EBITDA, where a larger one is selling for 10 to 12. Well, if you do a full acquisition and you take a significant part of that value in stock, for example, in the acquiring entity, whatever that delta is between what they're valuing themselves at and what you're foregoing that. So if they're buying you at 6 and they're at 12 and you take stock in their entity, well, you're going to get it at that 12x multiple. So you missed that run up from 6 to 12. In the minority transaction, you're only missing that run up on the portion that you monetize today. So if you sold 20% of your business at 6x, well, you're retaining 80% that in theory you're going to be able to monetize in the future at that higher multiple. Right. So minority transactions have had an economic advantage, I think, over full acquisitions. But where they've been weak at is in the integration. So a lot of minority transactions in the past, really, it was just a financial transaction. Take some, here's a check, send us our preferred return, have a nice day. That's more or less what that model was. Now we're seeing those two kind of blend, where there are minority transactions economically that are doing a lot of the integration that the full acquisition historically delivered. Yeah. So I think that's a real positive trend out there that I think is that, and access to capital. That would obviously be another trend that makes these things happen. There's so much money chasing this industry right now that's not the problem. Either if you're a seller or a buyer, I don't think capital is really the problem today.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was just thinking about this as you described it. I was really captivated there about the whole, minority transaction. I hadn't thought about that too much. I wonder if there's pockets of value that you've observed that may be overlooked. We started this podcast talking about how many buyers there are chasing deals, right? And that that it's can be challenging to stand out as a buyer to successfully, acquire a business, right? That there's just
Right.
so many others out there, and to compete, it's going to take some effort. And then working with somebody like yourself and your team can be very, very beneficial there. But I also think, or I wonder, maybe I suspect, I guess maybe that's the best way to say it. I suspect part of the challenge is, many of the buyers are out there hunting for the same type of acquisition, right? They're looking for the same type of acquisition, a mature practice where the seller might be in his or her late 50s or early 60s. So you're thinking, if I buy this thing, that at some point in time they're going to roll off and I'll have it all,
Mhm.
right? And that's good for the long term of my business. But I wonder, are there pockets of value that you see where, like, hey, listen, just like when you're building a sports team, right? All the GMs are looking for this type of player,
Yeah.
but over here, there's some goodness that
Well,
not everybody's looking
yeah,
at.
it's funny because I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to come about it in a different angle because we spend a lot of time trying to educate our clients on how to vet a cultural fit.
Mm,
Everyone talks about that. We've got to get the cultural fit right. Culture is most important. That constant drumbeat of that kind of message. Well, also find that very few people have a way to define the cultural fit. They don't have specific things that you can measure to determine if it's a cultural fit.
mm,
And because of that, it becomes this subjective black hole of, where they're essentially trying to find people who are already like them, people who act like them, share the same values and principles, and look like them from a business perspective.
right.
And so I try to get our clients to get very specific on points of alignment. What are the points of alignment that a seller coming into your environment has to agree to in order for you to feel like, it's a good fit? So it could be things like we're all going to be under the same brand.
Mm,
We're all going to use the same technology stack. We're all going to use the same client experience. And you just keep adding to that list based on your independent model or your worldview. And then they don't have to be perfect. I often tell them it's okay if you buy an ugly duckling
mm,
because you're going to make them pretty. You know, they don't have it all figured out. That's why they're talking to you, right? So just because they haven't grown for the last 3 years, 10% net new assets isn't necessarily an indicator that they can't grow. It may be they're so overwhelmed by their poor process, poor technology that they can't grow. So, you have to, and I'm using growth as one area where
sure.
firms
Yeah.
look at others and say, that's not a good fit because they're not growing. Well, why are they not growing? Is it because they don't want to grow? Is it because they're lazy? Is they're incompetent? Or is it because they're just overwhelmed from the business? If it's that, you can solve that problem for them as a buyer. So don't be put off that they haven't grown. And you can go down the list of things where they're trying to look at a potential seller and their standard of whether they're a cultural fit is if they are as competent and as good as they are
Mm,
in a host of areas. Well, one, finding people who look just like you is next to impossible,
right.
and so be willing to acquire a firm who obviously has good ethics and values and all the rest and takes care of their clients, but they may have some hair on them, that you have to clean up. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
That's actually an opportunity for you to experience lift in revenue, profitability, customer satisfaction, all those things will get better in your world. So get really tight on defining the cultural fit and understand that these smaller firms don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. When they join your firm, hopefully you're going to help them solve that.
Love it.
Those would be areas I find value,
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
I love it. No, it really kind of answers what I was going for there. That everybody looks for the firm that's still growing, right? That has a relatively young client base, right? All the things that they're looking for. It's like, well, of course, everybody's looking for that. Everybody's looking for the, when you're shopping for a house, everybody's looking for the move-in ready, perfect house, right?
And if they were that awesome, they likely wouldn't need you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't be interested in transacting with you if they had it all figured out. It was a 35-year-old team of rock stars who were growing at 30% a year and wonderful process technology. Why do they need you? So
exactly.
They're going to be you in a few years. They just keep growing like that. So.
And I think a great way to kind of wrap this up that really feeds into your model is not every business that is worthy of acquiring has listed themselves for sale, right? So there's going to take some work to have somebody like yourself and your team going out there, kind of beating the bushes a little bit for you. Like, okay, this is the type of thing you're looking for. I think we can go find that, right? That's effort. It takes work.
The vast majority of the acquisitions that we've done over the years were with firms who, when we first talked to them, would tell us we're not really actively looking for a partner, but we're interested to understand kind of what the landscape looks like and just kind of what's out there, right? And so they start with that frame of mind. Nothing is urgent or burning down in their world. They're often a locally, if not regionally, dominant practice. But they're open. They're mature enough to realize that there may be a better mousetrap out there. There may be a better way of doing things. What do we don't know? And so they start with that frame of mind, and we bring them through. We call it the ideal outcome phase, where we educate them on the economic structures, what they're designed to do. We try to understand what they're looking for potentially in an ideal economic outcome, what they're willing to divest in terms of autonomy, what's motivating them. And we just kind of we start, right? And as they learn and understand what exists out there and how that might be accretive to their goal and get them wherever they want to go faster, they start opening up to this concept of a partnership. And so we call it running downhill, so they just start jogging, and before you know it, we're a full sprint. And so that's the vast majority of our partnerships started that way. So it would be a rare occurrence for me to get on the phone with someone and say, yes, Alan, we've decided we're ready to sell. That conversation doesn't happen.
Thank God you called today, Alan. I'm ready to go. Let's do this thing. Well,
they get called. I tell you, everyone I get on the phone, it seems like their first opening comment is, we get like 5 to 10 calls a week from firms trying to buy us. And so there's no shortage of buyers, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great way to wrap it up. I really appreciate your time today. It's been really informative for me. I love these types of conversations where I learn a little bit more, and I've been doing this for a long time. So really, really helpful. I'm sure folks are going to want to follow up with you, Alan. What is the best way for people to follow up with you and the team?
Go to our website, alarisacquisitions.com, ALARIS acquisitions.com. There's all of our contact stuff is on there. You can reach out to me at alan.darby, ALLEN.DARBY at alarisacquisitions.com, and we can schedule an introductory chat. That would be the easiest way, I think.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure we get all that stuff linked up in the show notes for this episode. Well, thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your time down there in Dominican Republic.
I've got another few appointments, and then I'm going to be on the beach sipping a pina colada here soon. So
perfect. So something tells me the headquarters of Alaris is going to be DR.
You never know. Some tax advantages, perhaps. Let's see.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always great to have you with us. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you haven't done so already, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend. Chances are they're going to love the show as well, okay? Also, huge thanks to Alan Darby for carving out some time from his family vacation down in the Dominican Republic. Cannot tell you how jealous I am of Alan. I really do miss going to the DR or any beach vacation, frankly. So I'm looking forward to getting that jab in the arm and, get my travel on. I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, Hope you are staying safe. Please do keep wearing that mask. Get your vaccination when it's available to you. And be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Have a good one. See ya. Bye.